Today I'd like to continue our discussion of the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 23. In today's part of the book of Deuteronomy, we get into some laws of the Jewish people, laws that were meant to preserve the integrity of the community. The first law that we see here is that no child of an incestuous union may be admitted into the community of the Lord, nor descendants of that person to the 10th generation. Now, when we look at a law like that, we say, could that be a little bit of an extreme? Are we punishing the child for something that was done by adults? That's one of the things that we kind of look at today and say, well, is that a good way to handle this type of situation? Obviously, the thought was to set an example, to have a firm policy, so that when you have a policy like this, what you're trying to do is to discourage this type of behavior. And certainly that's appropriate. You want to discourage this type of action, incestuous union, because it really destroys the integrity of the family. And so you want to keep that integrity intact. But at the same time, punishing those who maybe were guilty of the action could be one thing, but punishing the child and punishing the child's descendants, we would look at that and say, well, is that an appropriate way to do it, to handle the situation? To stigmatize the child, to say that you're a bad child because of the fact that you came from this union that was not according to our moral principles. So we would kind of take a look at that and say, well, maybe a different approach would be better than punishing the child and punishing the child's descendants. The child might grow up to be a fine human being, and certainly could grow up, has the potential to grow up as a fine human being with a very supportive community that would help that child, that would encourage that child, that would show that child the positive aspects of their life, and not so much where they came from in terms of the union, but in terms of their potential as a person. And that's what you'd want to hold up. In a similar way, they talk about the Amorites and the Moabites, and they say that they may not be admitted into the community of the Lord, nor descendants to the 10th generation, because they gave the Israelites no food, nor water on their journey from Egypt. So to sort of punish them, they can't be admitted into the community. Again, you run into the same problem. You're punishing a whole group with the actions of these people who maybe they have no relationship to the action that they did. Maybe these people now who are descendant from the Amorites and Moabites are fine people, wonderful people. They want to embrace Judaism. They love the religion. They love some of the people that they've met. And you're excluding them because of actions that were done by their ancestors. And so we would take a look at that and say, well, isn't it better to evaluate people on their own merits, what they have done, and not what people maybe 8 or 9 generations before them have done? Another law that is mentioned here in chapter 23 is to show no hatred for the Edomite or the Egyptian. Children born to them in the 3rd generation may be admitted into the community. So the Edomites and the Egyptians, many of them really did wonderful things for the Jewish people. So their punishment was not going to be as extreme as that of the Amorites and the Moabites. It was only to the 3rd generation. So a little bit closer, they could be admitted into the community. And certainly the Edomites, they were relatives of Esau, and the Egyptians, they initially had accepted the Jewish people when Joseph, of course, was there into their kingdom, and it helped them and really relieved them from the famine situation that they were facing. So the Pharaoh, of course, at the time when Moses wanted to leave, that's a different story. He wasn't all that kind at all. But some of the Egyptians certainly were very kind, and of course when they left, they did offer them many material possessions to help them on their journey. Another set of laws deals with the cleanliness of the camp, which was an extremely important issue. If someone has a nocturnal emission, for example, they should go outside the camp and not return until toward evening and after they have bathed in water and the sun has set. So the idea is that they should be removed from the camp. They've sort of spoiled the camp by the nocturnal emission, and so this was not a good thing for the cleanliness of the camp. So they should bathe, they should be outside the camp, and then come in the evening when I think a lot of them would be coming in anyway to sleep. So it was just a sense of the cleanliness of the camp was very important. To make that even more obvious, there was a law about latrines. Latrines would be set up outside of the camp, and the excrement should be buried with a trowel. So again, of course, this is just natural sanitation. It makes sense. Bury it outside the camp. Make sure that it doesn't get into the camp to create any problem with, of course, disease you're concerned about. So basic sanitary precautions that are set up. But it's interesting the importance of the cleanliness of the camp. Cleanliness of the camp was really a point of emphasis. And the reason for the cleanliness of the camp is very interesting. I think it says a lot about the Jewish people and their faith. The concept here was the camp should be kept clean because God is journeying with the people. God is there. God is with us. God is in our presence. So because God is with us, we should do everything we can to be clean, to keep the camp clean, to make sure that in everything we do, we have a recognition that it's not just us as human beings. There's a real sense that God is with us, God is in our midst, that we love God, we respect God, and we want to keep everything to do with God very holy and very sacred. And of course, our same feeling today when we consider ourselves to be temples of the Holy Spirit. The idea that we want to keep our bodies clean and pure, our emphasis on chastity and purity, extremely important in our days today, as it certainly was here for the Jewish people. Another aspect of the law that is brought up in chapter 23 is in terms of a slave. And it says you should not hand over a slave who has taken refuge from his master with you. He can live in any of the communities he chooses. So if the slave comes and the slave wants to take refuge with you, maybe the master has been mistreating the slave and the slave wants to escape from the master. And of course, that would be the situation because if the master was treating the slave well and the slave was thriving in this relationship with the master, the slave would not be seeking refuge. The slave would be happy. Many of the slaves would have content, and they were more of a relationship like with a servant. And it was a very positive relationship. We're not talking about slaves in terms of slavery in our southern United States. This is a different concept here entirely. But if the slave is taking refuge, there was a problem, there was an issue, and that slave should be accepted and can then become part of any community. And it's sort of similar to our teaching today about refugees and how refugees who come from very difficult situations who are persecuted in their homeland should be accepted. So some very interesting laws we find here in chapter 23 of the book of Deuteronomy.